This story is titled, On My Birthday, My Stepmother and Dad Announced I Must Pay Rent for My Own Bedroom, but since it's my room, I just gathered my belongings and left them behind. Hey everyone, I'm 29 years old, and I never thought I'd be posting my personal drama online, but here we are. I'm using a throwaway account for obvious reasons. This story is kind of long, but I promise it's worth the read if you've ever dealt with family members who treat you like a personal ATM. Up until a few months ago, I was basically a walking cash machine for my entire family. It wasn't a role I signed up for, but somehow I ended up trapped in this situation for years. I finally hit my breaking point last Christmas, and the aftermath has been both devastating and liberating. Let me give you some backstory first. I grew up in a lower middle-class neighborhood in Pennsylvania. Nothing fancy, just a regular 3-bedroom ranch house in the suburbs that looked like every other house on the block. My dad worked as a truck driver and was usually gone 4 to 5 days a week on long hauls across the country. My mom had a part-time position at a dental office doing administrative work, answering phones and scheduling appointments. We weren't poor enough to qualify for government assistance, but we definitely had to watch our spending carefully. I remember getting new clothes only when the old ones literally had holes in them, and we never ate out at restaurants unless it was someone's birthday or a really special occasion. That was just how things were, and I accepted it as normal. I have an older brother named Dylan who's 32 years old. He was always the golden child in our family, the basketball star in high school who peaked at 18 and never really accomplished much after that. He managed to get a partial scholarship to a state college, which seemed like a big deal at the time, but he dropped out after just 2 semesters. According to him, it was because the professors were all out to get him and had it in for him personally. Then there's my little sister Lisa, who's 21 years old and has always been the baby of the family. Somehow, she always managed to get whatever she wanted, despite our supposedly tight family finances. I was always the responsible one in the family. I got decent grades throughout school, held down part-time jobs since I was 16, and went to community college because it was what we could realistically afford. I wasn't exceptional at anything particular, but I was reliable and consistent. Looking back now, maybe that reliability was my first mistake. Everything in our family dynamic changed dramatically when my dad hurt his back in a loading accident about 4 years ago. He was helping unload his truck at a delivery site when something heavy shifted and slipped, and boom, he ended up with 2 herniated discs. It was a legitimate injury that required surgery and physical therapy. He claimed he was waiting for a workers' compensation settlement that never seemed to actually materialize, though. There was always some excuse: paperwork issues, problems with his lawyer, insurance company delays, or some other bureaucratic nightmare that kept pushing the settlement further and further into the future. I had just landed a decent marketing coordinator job after finishing my associate's degree, making decent money. Not amazing, but definitely good for someone my age in our area. When Dad's injury happened, I was still living at home and saving up money for my own place. I was paying $450 a month in rent to my parents, which seemed fair at first. It felt like a reasonable contribution for someone in my situation. At the beginning, I just chipped in a bit extra here and there when needed. I'd grab groceries when the fridge was looking empty, or I'd cover the electric bill when Mom casually mentioned it was overdue. It seemed like totally normal stuff that any decent son would do when his family hits a rough patch, right? I thought I was just being helpful during a temporary difficult period. But gradually, almost without me noticing, it morphed into something else entirely. The requests became more frequent and more demanding. Marcus, the mortgage is due, and we're short this month. Marcus, the car payment is 3 days late. We need $385 by tomorrow. Marcus, Lisa needs a new laptop for school, and this one is really important for her classes. Before I knew what was happening, I was dropping between $2,200 and $2,800 every single month on my family's expenses, while still living in what was essentially my childhood bedroom with the same furniture I'd had since middle school. Meanwhile, my older brother Dylan had moved into the finished basement, which had its own bathroom and even a separate entrance so he could come and go as he pleased. He'd bounced between minimum wage jobs, never lasting more than a few months at any of them before quitting or getting fired. He would contribute absolutely nothing to household expenses, claiming he was building his music career. In reality, this translated to playing guitar badly in his room for hours and occasionally posting awful cover songs on YouTube that got maybe 12 views each. What really got to me was that Mom and Dad never pressed him on contributing anything financially. Just like they never commented on the constant smell of weed that drifted up from the basement into the rest of the house. Dylan got a complete free pass on everything, while I was expected to be the family's financial savior. The double standard was so obvious, it was painful. But whenever I brought it up, I was told I was being divisive, or that Dylan was going through a hard time. The resentment had been building for years, but I kept telling myself it was temporary. Dad's settlement would come through eventually, or he'd get better and go back to work, or Dylan would finally grow up and get a real job. I kept thinking that if I just held on a little longer, things would go back to normal. I was wrong. Fast forward to this past Christmas. We're all sitting around the dining room table for our traditional holiday dinner. Mom had made the whole spread: ham, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, the works. It looked like a picture-perfect family gathering, except for one crucial detail. I had paid for all of it, of course, including the fancy organic ham that Mom had insisted on getting from the expensive grocery store across town. $78 for a single piece of meat. Are you kidding me? But I'd bought it anyway because arguing about it would have just caused more drama. Dad was watching football highlights on his phone between bites, completely absorbed in the screen instead of engaging with the family he claimed was so important to him. Dylan was texting someone and ignoring everyone at the table, probably coordinating some drug deal or complaining to his equally unemployed friends. Lisa was busy posting Instagram stories of all the food I'd paid for, adding captions like "blessed" and "family time" with little heart emojis, as if she had any appreciation for where any of it actually came from. I was absolutely exhausted from a brutal week at work where I'd pulled 3 late nights in a row fixing a marketing campaign crisis that wasn't even my fault. All I wanted was to enjoy a meal I'd financed, and maybe feel some appreciation for once. Or at least have one peaceful family dinner where no one asked me for money. That's when it happened. As I was reaching for another dinner roll, Dad cleared his throat in that deliberate way that meant he had something important to announce. "Marcus has been living here rent-free for too long now," he said matter-of-factly, not even looking up from his phone. I nearly choked on the bite of food I'd just taken. "Excuse me?" I managed to say once I'd stopped coughing. Mom nodded, like this announcement had been rehearsed between them beforehand. "We've been talking about this, honey," she said in that condescending tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "You're 29 now. It's time for you to get your own place and start living like an adult." I put down my fork before I did something I'd regret, like stabbing someone with it. "What are you talking about?" "I pay rent. I've been paying rent." "Well, yes," Mom said slowly. "But you stopped the regular $450 payments about 2 years ago." Was she seriously going to sit there and say that with a straight face? "Because I started paying the mortgage instead. And the utilities, and the groceries, and basically everything else around here." Dylan snorted without even looking up from his phone. "Dude, it's pathetic that you're still living in Mom and Dad's house at your age. I'd literally die of embarrassment." This was coming from the unemployed 32-year-old who hadn't contributed a single dime to household expenses in his entire adult life. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The basement comment was especially rich since he occupied the nicest part of the house, the finished basement with its own mini fridge, big screen TV setup, and complete privacy, while I was crammed into my old 10x12 childhood bedroom with the same furniture I'd had since middle school. "I pay to live here," I said, my voice getting louder with each word. "I pay more than what living here is actually worth." Dad waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "That's not the point. A man your age needs his own place. Your mother and I think it's time." I let out a laugh, but there was absolutely nothing funny about the situation. "Let me get this straight," I said, looking around the table at each of them. "I cover the full $750 mortgage payment every month. I pay the $285 electric bill that's so high because you insist on keeping the house at 72 degrees year-round. I cover the $165 internet and cable package that you insisted on getting for all your precious sports channels. I buy groceries that run $825 a month because Dylan eats like a horse and you all have expensive tastes. And I pay $2,800 toward Lisa's community college tuition. And somehow I'm the one who needs to move out?" The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. "What about him?" I said, jabbing my fork in Dylan's direction. "When does the basement dweller contribute anything to this household?" Mom's face immediately went into defensive mode. "Your brother is going through a transitional period," she said, in that protective tone she always used when anyone criticized her precious golden child. "His music career is about to take off. He just needs time to develop his talent." "He's been transitional for 12 years, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "When exactly does he have to transition into being an actual adult who pays his own bills?" Dylan finally looked up from his phone, his face twisted in contempt. "Screw you, man. Not everyone wants to be a corporate sellout drone like you. Some of us have artistic integrity. Dad pointed his finger at me threateningly. Watch your tone with your brother. Your brother is following his passion, and anyway, this isn't about Dylan. This is about you needing your own space. My own space? I repeated in complete disbelief. Or you wanting my money without having to see my face every day? Because that's what this really sounds like. The table went completely silent again. Dad's face started turning that familiar shade of red that meant he was about to explode. Lisa finally looked up from her phone, sensing there was some drama worth paying attention to for her social media content. How dare you? Mom said in a low, dangerous voice that I'd heard her use on telemarketers and bill collectors. After everything we've done for you over the years. What exactly have you done for me lately? I asked, genuinely curious to hear her answer. Please enlighten me, because from where I'm sitting, I've been carrying this entire household for years while getting nothing but criticism and demands for more money in return. Mom sighed dramatically, giving me that condescending look she'd perfected over the years. The same expression she used when explaining something to a particularly slow child. No one's saying you don't help out, Marcus. But this is about your independence. We're only thinking of what's best for you. Best for me? I nearly shouted, my voice rising to a level that probably alarmed the neighbors. Or best for you? The table went silent again, but this time the tension was so thick you could practically cut it with a knife. Lisa had actually stopped pretending to eat and was now openly recording everything on her phone, probably planning to post it on her stupid TikTok account later with some caption about family drama. That's when it hit me like a freight train going full speed. They hadn't thought once about what would actually happen after I left. They'd gotten so comfortable with me handling all the bills, so accustomed to having their personal ATM machine living under their roof, that they just automatically assumed the money would keep flowing in even after they kicked me out. They wanted me gone, but they still expected me to keep paying for everything. The sheer audacity of it was absolutely breathtaking. I sat there for a moment, steam practically coming out of my ears, thinking about everything I'd given up for these people over the years. When I graduated from community college, I'd had the opportunity to transfer to a 4-year university with a decent partial scholarship that would have covered most of my tuition. I turned it down because Dad got injured that exact same month, and I needed to start working full-time to help out with what I thought would be temporary financial difficulties. My entire educational future was sacrificed on the altar of family responsibility. When my friends were renting apartments downtown, going to concerts on weekends, and taking spontaneous road trips, I was giving 70% of my paycheck to my family every month. I drove a 12-year-old Honda Civic with 175,000 miles on it and a transmission that made concerning noises, because every time I managed to save up money for a decent used car, some emergency would come up that required my immediate financial intervention. Just last year, I had $7,200 saved up for a down payment on a reliable used car that wouldn't leave me stranded on the highway. Then Lisa decided she absolutely needed to go on a $6,800 study abroad program in France that was supposedly critical for her personal development and future career prospects. Mom and Dad couldn't possibly say no to their precious baby girl. They never could. So guess who ended up paying for her European vacation while continuing to drive a car that might die at any moment? I had turned down a promotion earlier that year that would have required relocating to our company's branch office in another state. That job would have bumped my salary up significantly and given me amazing experience. But I declined it because Mom literally cried about how they couldn't manage without me nearby. She made me feel like I'd be abandoning my family in their time of greatest need if I took the opportunity. I even broke up with my last girlfriend because she got tired of never going anywhere or doing anything fun. I couldn't afford to take her out to nice restaurants or weekend getaways because I was spending all my disposable income on my family's bills. She told me point blank that I was being used and manipulated, and I actually defended my family to her. I called her selfish for not understanding family obligations. What a complete fool I was. 4 years of my life, completely gone. 4 years of building my career, my savings, my independence, all of it sacrificed for people who now had the unbelievable audacity to call me a freeloader living in their house. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. I took a deep breath, trying my absolute best not to flip the entire dining room table over and storm out like some kind of maniac. Fine, I said, my voice suddenly becoming eerily calm in a way that should have worried them. If that's what you really want. Mom's face immediately relaxed, and I could see the relief washing over her features. She probably thought she'd won some kind of victory. I know it seems scary, honey, but this really is good for you in the long run. We can help you look for an apartment this weekend if you want. There's that new complex by the shopping center that seems nice and affordable. I nodded slowly, letting her think she had everything under control. Don't bother. I'll start packing tonight. For the first time that entire evening, uncertainty flickered across her face like a shadow. She'd expected me to argue more, to beg for more time, to negotiate some kind of compromise that would keep their cash cow in the house a little longer. Dad was still too focused on whatever football game was playing on his phone to notice the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, and Dylan just mumbled something about passing the gravy, apparently more interested in getting seconds than paying attention to the life-changing conversation happening right in front of him. I spent the rest of that miserable meal sitting in complete silence, mechanically chewing my food while mentally calculating how much money I actually had in my savings account. The answer wasn't encouraging, thanks to years of what I now realized were manufactured family emergencies designed to keep me financially drained and dependent on staying in their house. It was pathetic how little I had to show for years of steady employment, but I'd figure something out. The irony wasn't lost on me that they wanted me to move out immediately, but because of their constant financial demands over the years, I barely had enough saved up for a security deposit on a decent apartment. They'd systematically bled me dry and were now upset that I didn't have the resources to disappear quietly and conveniently. After dinner, Mom tried to corner me in the kitchen while I was helping clean up. Or rather, while I was doing all the cleaning up by myself as usual. "Marcus, honey, don't be so dramatic about this," she said in that fake sweet voice she used when she was about to ask for something. "We can talk about a timeline that works for everyone involved." "A timeline that works for everyone?" I repeated, not even trying to hide my sarcasm. "You mean a timeline that ensures you still get my money for as long as possible while I'm stupid enough to keep giving it to you?" She had the decency to look at least somewhat embarrassed, though I'm sure it was more about getting caught than actual remorse. "That's not what I meant, Marcus. It's just that this is a big change for all of us and we should plan it properly so nobody gets hurt." "Oh, I'll plan it properly," I said, scraping leftover food into the garbage disposal with more force than was strictly necessary. "Don't worry about that." I barely slept that night. I just laid there in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling with its familiar water stain from when the roof leaked 3 years ago, watching the shadows from passing cars move across the walls. A lifetime of being the responsible one while being treated like absolute garbage was playing through my head on repeat like some kind of psychological torture device. Every sacrifice, every missed opportunity, every time I'd prioritize their needs over my own future, it all came flooding back in vivid detail. The next morning, I got up early. Not because I had planned to, but because anger and resentment apparently make for excellent alarm clocks. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck, but I was more determined than I'd ever been in my entire life. I dug out my old duffel bags from the closet and started methodically throwing in clothes, electronics, important paperwork, and anything else I could legitimately call my own. The truth was, I didn't actually have much furniture that belonged to me personally. According to my parents, the bed, desk, and dresser in my room all belonged to the house, even though I'd actually bought the desk myself when I started working remotely twice a week and needed a proper workspace. But I wasn't going to fight them over furniture when I was trying to make a clean break. I started doing calculations in my head while I packed, trying to figure out if this was even financially feasible. First and last month's rent somewhere would probably be at least $1,800 for anything decent. Security deposit would be another $900 minimum. Then there were moving costs, setting up utilities, buying basic furniture. The expenses were adding up fast. I had about $3,900 in my savings account, which was honestly pathetic after 4 years of working a decent full-time job. But that's what happens when you're essentially supporting 5 people on one income while everyone else contributes absolutely nothing. Around 11 a.m., Lisa appeared in my doorway, still wearing her pajamas despite it being almost noon. She was scrolling through her phone as usual, but I could tell she was watching me pack from the corner of her eye, probably trying to figure out if this was all some kind of elaborate bluff to get more attention. "You're seriously leaving?" she asked, trying to sound casual but completely failing to hide her concern. I zipped up a bag with more force than was strictly necessary. "That's what they wanted, isn't it?" She leaned against the doorframe in that deliberately casual way that meant she was fishing for information. "Mom said you'd probably get over it by morning and everything would go back to normal." I let out a bitter laugh that had absolutely no humor in it. "Of course she did. She thinks I'm just throwing some kind of temper tantrum that'll blow over if she ignores it long enough." "I mean, kind of," Lisa continued, still scrolling through her phone as she spoke and not even bothering to look at me directly. "You were pretty dramatic at dinner last night. It was kind of embarrassing, honestly." "Dramatic?" I stopped packing completely and turned to face her, Are you kidding me right now? She shrugged with that infuriating teenage indifference that she'd somehow maintained well into her 20s. I know you help out sometimes, but sometimes, I cut her off. Lisa, do you have any idea how much money I've put into this household over the past 4 years? How much I've sacrificed so you could live your comfortable little life? Another shrug. I know you help out with bills and stuff. I pay for everything, I said, my voice getting louder with each word. Including your college, by the way. That $2,800 per semester doesn't just appear out of thin air like magic. For the first time since she'd entered my room, she actually looked up from her phone, and I could see genuine confusion mixed with dawning realization spreading across her face. Wait, I thought Mom and Dad were paying for my classes. Nope, that's all me. Just like the trip to France last summer that was so essential for your personal growth. Just like the new iPhone you got for your birthday. Just like pretty much everything else around here that costs more than $20. She stood there awkwardly for a minute, and I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She was still young, and she'd been trapped in this toxic household dynamic, just like I had been, learning terrible lessons about entitlement and family responsibility. But then I remembered how she'd maxed out the credit card I'd foolishly added her to as an authorized user for emergencies only, racking up $550 worth of clothes and makeup from online shopping sites. When I confronted her about it, she just shrugged and said, "You can afford it," like my money was somehow automatically hers to spend. "But if you leave, how will they pay for everything?" she asked. And I could practically see the gears turning in her head as the reality of the situation started to sink in. If I wasn't around to pay for her college anymore, what would happen to her comfortable lifestyle? Who would cover her car insurance, her phone bill, her endless stream of necessities? That's a great question, I said, going back to my packing with renewed energy. Maybe you should ask Dylan to contribute for once in his pathetic life. Or Dad could try actually following up on that workers' compensation claim he's been talking about for 4 years straight. Or Mom could work full-time instead of part-time. There are lots of options that don't involve exploiting me like a personal piggy bank. Her voice hardened immediately, and I could see her defensive walls going up. You're being so selfish. Family is supposed to help each other out. And there it was. The family mantra that had been used to manipulate and guilt-trip me for years. The magic phrase that was supposed to make me feel terrible for wanting to have my own life and financial independence. Family goes both ways, Lisa, I said, not even bothering to look at her as I continued stuffing clothes into bags. It's not supposed to be one person giving everything while everyone else takes whatever they want. That's not family. That's parasitism. Her eyes widened like I'd just slapped her across the face, and for a split second I thought I might have actually gotten through to her. That maybe she'd finally understand how screwed up this whole situation had become. But then she just scoffed, turned around, and walked away, tapping furiously on her phone. She was probably texting her friends about what a complete jerk her brother was being, or posting some passive-aggressive Instagram story about fake family members, or something equally ridiculous. I went back to packing, feeling a strange mix of anger, relief, and genuine fear about what I was doing. I had no concrete idea where I was going to live or how I was going to afford it on such short notice. But I knew one thing for absolute certain. I wasn't staying in this house for another single day. I couldn't handle another moment of being treated like a cash machine with legs instead of an actual human being who deserved basic respect and appreciation. By noon, I had most of my belongings packed into bags and boxes. I made multiple trips carrying everything out to my beat-up Honda, and not once did anyone offer to help me load anything. Dylan was still asleep in his basement kingdom, probably not even aware that the family drama was happening directly above his head. Mom was too upset to come out of her bedroom, though I noticed she'd managed to find the energy to do her makeup perfectly, despite her supposed emotional distress. Dad was out in the garage, supposedly looking for something, which was basically his standard code for avoiding any kind of confrontation or difficult conversation. On my last trip down the stairs, carrying a heavy box of books and personal items, Mom finally emerged from her bedroom sanctuary. Her makeup was flawless as always, and her hair was perfectly styled despite the fact that she'd supposedly been crying all morning about her son abandoning the family. Her eyes went immediately to the box in my arms, and her carefully composed expression shifted from practiced sadness to genuine alarm. "Wait, you're actually leaving right now? Today?" I stared at her like she'd just asked me if the sky was blue. "Isn't that what last night was about? Wasn't that the entire point of the conversation?" She frowned, clearly flustered that her manipulation tactics weren't working according to plan. "Well, yes, but I thought we'd have time to, make proper arrangements. Figure out a timeline that works for everyone." I've made my arrangements, I lied smoothly. The truth was that I had some money saved. Not much, but enough for a security deposit somewhere if I was lucky. I had a buddy named Trevor, who'd probably let me crash on his couch for a few days if I was desperate. Beyond that, I'd have to figure things out as I went along, but I was determined to make it work somehow. I pushed past her and headed for the front door, balancing the heavy box while trying to turn the doorknob without dropping everything. Just as I was about to step outside and officially leave this toxic household behind, Dad came wandering in from the garage. His hands were surprisingly clean for someone who claimed to have been rummaging around in there for the past hour, which pretty much confirmed my suspicion that he'd just been hiding out there to avoid dealing with the consequences of last night's conversation. "So you're really doing this, huh?" he said, crossing his arms over his chest in what I'm sure he thought was an intimidating pose. "Running away when things get tough like some kind of child?" I ignored him completely, continuing to struggle with the door handle while balancing the box that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of getting drawn into another pointless argument where I'd end up being blamed for everything wrong with this family's finances. "Marcus," Mom said, and I could hear her voice taking on that fake sweet tone that always preceded a demand for money. "Before you go storming off in a huff, we need to discuss the household expenses that you've been helping with." I turned back slowly, curious to see just how far they were willing to push this ridiculous charade. "What about them?" She spoke as if she was explaining something incredibly obvious to a particularly slow child. "Well, obviously we understand that you're moving out and want your independence, but we still need your help with the mortgage and utilities and other essential expenses. You've been handling those responsibilities for so long, and we just can't manage everything overnight. We thought you could send around $800 a month until we get things figured out and back on track." I stared at her in complete disbelief, wondering if she'd actually lost her mind or if she really thought I was that stupid. "Are you serious right now?" She looked genuinely surprised at my response, like she couldn't understand why I wasn't immediately agreeing to her perfectly reasonable request. "There's no need for that tone, Marcus. This is a reasonable request. We're your family, and families help each other through difficult times." Dad stepped closer, trying to loom over me in a way that was probably supposed to be intimidating but just made him look pathetic. "After everything we've done for you over the years, this is how you repay us? By leaving us high and dry when we need you most? What kind of son does that make you?" That's when Dylan finally made his grand appearance, shuffling up from his basement lair wearing dirty sweatpants and a stained t-shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. His hair was sticking up in every direction, and he had that glazed look that suggested he'd spent the morning getting high instead of dealing with reality. "What's with all the noise up here?" he complained, rubbing his eyes like some kind of overgrown toddler. "Some of us are trying to sleep." It was 12:30 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. "Marcus thinks he's too good for this family now," Dad said, shaking his head in what I'm sure he thought was righteous disappointment. "He's going to leave us to fend for ourselves while he goes off and plays big shot in his own apartment." Dylan looked at me with pure contempt, like I was some kind of traitor to everything the family stood for. "Dude, that's seriously cold. Mom and Dad gave you everything growing up. They sacrificed so much for you, and this is how you repay them?" I set the box down on the floor, afraid that I might actually throw it at someone's head if I had to hold it for another second. "They gave me nothing," I said, my voice getting louder with each word. "I've been carrying this entire family financially for years while you sit on your lazy ass playing video games all day and pretending to have a music career." "I'm injured," Dad shouted, pointing dramatically to his back like he was auditioning for a medical drama. "You think I want to be stuck at home all day? You think I don't want to be out on the road making money and supporting my family? I think it's pretty convenient that your injury never seems to stop you from playing golf with Uncle Steve every Wednesday," I shot back. "Or helping him move furniture last month when he bought that new couch. But somehow, it prevents you from getting any kind of job at all for 4 straight years." Mom stepped between us before Dad could respond, holding up her hands like she was trying to referee a boxing match. "Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping anyone, and we need to focus on finding a solution that works for everyone." She turned to me, her expression softening into that manipulative look I knew all too well. The same expression she used on telemarketers when she wanted to cancel a service but still get a refund, or on store managers when she wanted to return something without a receipt. "Marcus, honey, we're not asking for the world here. Just some help during the transition period while we adjust to this change. You can still have your independence and your own place. We just need a little financial support until we get back on our feet." "How long is until you get back on your feet?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear what kind of timeline they had in mind for their magical financial recovery. She hesitated for just a moment, and I could see her brain working to come up with an answer that would sound reasonable. Well, until your father's settlement comes through from the workers' compensation case, or until he's able to work again, or until Dylan's music career takes off and he starts making money. So basically forever, I said. Got it. No. I said the word with more force and conviction than I'd ever used in my entire life. It felt strange and powerful coming out of my mouth, like I was finally speaking a language I'd never been allowed to use before. I'm not giving you another dime, not $1. This ends today. You ungrateful little, Dad started, taking a step toward me with his fists clenched. But Mom quickly put her hand on his arm to stop him from doing something he'd regret. Don't, Robert, she said quietly. Then she turned back to me with tears starting to well up in her eyes. Marcus, please. We're not asking for everything you make. Just enough to keep us afloat until we can figure things out. You can afford it. You make good money, and you won't have any major expenses if you're just renting a small apartment somewhere. I make decent money that I work for, I said, emphasizing each word so there could be no misunderstanding. And no, I can't afford to pay for 2 households. Not anymore. Those days are officially over. So that's it? Dad said, his voice rising with incredulous anger. You're just going to abandon your family? Your mother who raised you and sacrificed everything for you? Your dad who put food on the table all those years when things were tough? Your brother and sister who need you and look up to you? I actually laughed out loud at that last part. Oh, now I'm family? Now you acknowledge everything I've done and contributed? Funny how that only happens when you want something from me. Where was all this appreciation for the past 4 years when I was actually doing all this stuff? Mom started tearing up in earnest now, deploying her go-to manipulation tactic that I'd seen her use successfully on Dad, on my teachers when I was in school, on bill collectors, and on basically anyone who wasn't immediately giving her what she wanted. She daintily dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, being very careful not to smudge her perfectly applied mascara. Please, Marcus, she said in a voice that was designed to break my heart. If you don't help us, we'll lose the house. They'll repossess the car. We could end up on the street and it'll be winter soon. How can you live with yourself knowing your family is homeless? Not my problem, I said, surprising even myself with how cold and detached my voice sounded. You made your choice last night when you decided I wasn't welcome here anymore, so I'm gone. This isn't what we meant, Mom cried. The tears flowing freely now as she realized her manipulation tactics weren't working like they usually did. We just wanted you to have your own space and grow as a person. We never meant for you to cut us off completely. It's exactly what you meant, I snapped back. You just didn't think through the consequences of your actions. You thought you could kick me out of the house and still keep taking my money like nothing had changed. Well, guess what? It doesn't work that way. Dad's face was getting redder by the second, and I could see the veins in his forehead starting to bulge in that way that meant he was about to completely lose his temper. You listen here. No, you listen. I cut him off before he could launch into another one of his lectures about family responsibility and respect. For once in your life, you're going to hear me out and actually listen to what I have to say. They all stared at me in complete shock. I'd never spoken to them like this before, never stood up for myself in such a direct and confrontational way. I'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who avoided conflict and just went along with whatever they wanted to keep everyone happy. I have put my entire life on hold for this family, I continued, my voice getting stronger and more confident with each word. I've given up my education, career advancement opportunities, relationships, and any hope of building my own savings. All so you could maintain this ridiculous facade of middle-class stability while doing absolutely nothing to actually contribute to it. And your response to years of sacrifice and financial support was to tell me that I'm not welcome here anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that house. I've enabled this completely dysfunctional situation for far too long, I said, feeling like I was finally speaking my truth after years of keeping my mouth shut. Well, it ends today. I'm leaving, and the Bank of Marcus is officially closed for business. Figure it out yourselves for once. I picked up my box and headed toward the door with renewed determination. Mom made one last desperate attempt to guilt me into staying, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine panic. Marcus, please, at least pay the mortgage this month. Just this one last time to give us time to make arrangements and figure out what we're going to do. I turned back to look at them one final time, taking in the sight of my so-called family standing there in their pajamas and stained clothes, looking like the entitled, lazy people they really were underneath all their manipulation and guilt trips. You know what? I've got a better idea, I said with a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. I'll leave you with the exact same thing you've left me with all these years. Nothing but empty promises and guilt trips designed to make other people feel responsible for your problems. And with that final statement, I walked out of that house, slamming the door behind me so hard that the cheap decorative mirror hanging in the hallway fell off the wall and shattered into a dozen pieces. It was fitting, really. Just like that mirror, the illusion of our happy family had finally been broken beyond repair. That first week after leaving was rough, and I'm not going to lie about it. I crashed at my buddy Trevor's apartment for 5 days, sleeping on his lumpy couch and feeling like a complete failure, despite knowing deep down that I'd made the right choice. Trevor was incredibly cool about the whole situation. He'd met my family a few times over the years and had always said they treated me like garbage. But I still felt like I was imposing on his hospitality and disrupting his normal routine. I spent every waking hour apartment hunting and obsessively budgeting, trying to figure out how to make my limited savings stretch far enough to get me into a place of my own. It was shocking to realize how much more affordable life could be when I was only paying for myself instead of supporting an entire household of freeloaders. For the first time in years, I was actually excited about the possibility of having money left over after paying my bills. Eventually, after looking at dozens of overpriced dumps and getting rejected by several landlords who wanted more income verification than I could provide, I found a small studio apartment that I could just barely afford. It was only 480 square feet with a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom so small you could practically shower while sitting on the toilet. But it was mine. Nobody would be asking me for money, guilting me into paying for things that weren't my responsibility, or treating me like a personal ATM machine with legs. The first month in my new place, I turned off notifications from my family's phone numbers because the calls and texts were absolutely nonstop. It was like they couldn't comprehend that I was serious about cutting them off financially. My phone would buzz constantly throughout the day with increasingly desperate and manipulative messages. The mortgage is due and we don't have the money. The electric company sent a final notice. They're going to shut off the power. Dad needs his prescription medication and we can't afford it. Lisa is crying because she can't go back to school. Each message was more desperate and guilt-inducing than the last, designed to make me feel like a monster for not immediately rushing back to solve all their self-created problems. I finally made myself look at them all one night after a particularly rough day at work when I was feeling lonely and second-guessing my decision. There were 47 text messages and 23 missed calls over just a 2-week period. The tone of the messages evolved in a predictable pattern. They started angry. "You're abandoning your family when we need you most." Then moved to guilt-tripping. "Mom cried all night because of what you're doing to us." Then escalated to desperate. "They're going to shut off the water tomorrow if we don't pay." And finally turned threatening. "You'll regret this when you have no family left and you're all alone in the world." I blocked all their numbers after reading through that digital pile of manipulation and emotional blackmail. I needed to focus on rebuilding my own life and establishing some sense of financial stability, not continuing to be emotionally manipulated from a distance by people who had never shown me an ounce of genuine appreciation or respect. After a while, the attempts to contact me through other means stopped as well. I figured they'd probably found another solution to their money problems. Maybe Dylan had finally gotten a real job, or Dad's workers' compensation settlement had miraculously come through after 4 years of delays, or they'd found another relative to leech off of. Honestly, I didn't really care what they'd done as long as they left me alone. Then, about 2 months after I'd moved out, I ran into my old neighbor Mrs. Johnson at the grocery store while I was doing my weekly shopping. She was a sweet elderly woman who'd lived next door to my parents for over 15 years and always knew everything that was happening in the neighborhood. "Marcus, I haven't seen you in ages," she said, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "How are you doing, honey? Are you still living at home with your parents?" We chatted pleasantly for a few minutes about my new job responsibilities and my little apartment before she dropped a bombshell that I definitely wasn't expecting. "Your family's having quite a rough time from what I hear," she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing sensitive gossip. "The bank put a foreclosure notice on the house last week. I saw the official papers taped to the front door." I nodded calmly, feeling a weird mixture of guilt and satisfaction churning in my stomach. "Is that so?" "Oh yes," she continued, apparently not noticing my complete lack of surprise at this news. "Your mother's been telling everyone at church that you abandoned them in their time of greatest need. But between you and me, I always thought it was strange how you seemed to be the only one working in that house. Your brother's car hasn't moved from the driveway in weeks. I think it might have gotten repossessed. And I saw your parents at the dollar store last week buying ramen noodles and boxed mac and cheese in bulk like they were preparing for some kind of disaster." I felt a small twinge of sympathy, especially when I thought about Lisa and how this situation was probably affecting her college plans and her future. But then I quickly hardened my heart against those feelings. They had made their bed through years of entitlement and financial irresponsibility, and now they were finally lying in it. This was the natural consequence of their choices, not some random tragedy that had befallen them. When I got home that evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to temporarily unblock their phone numbers to check if there were any new messages I'd missed since cutting off contact. What I found was dozens upon dozens of increasingly frantic texts from every member of my family, each message more desperate than the last. From Dad: "The bank's taking the house, and this is all on you. How can you sleep at night knowing your family is being thrown out on the street like garbage? This is what we get for raising an ungrateful son." From Mom: "Please, Marcus, we're literally begging you. We need $20,700 by Friday, or we'll be evicted from our home. I know we've made mistakes in how we handled things, but please don't punish your sister for our errors. She doesn't deserve to suffer because of this family conflict." From Dylan: "You're completely dead to me, bro. Mom cries herself to sleep every night, and Dad's back is getting worse from all the stress you're putting on this family. I hope you're happy living in your fancy apartment while we're suffering and about to become homeless." From Lisa: "I had to drop out of college because we can't afford the tuition anymore. Thanks a lot. My entire future is completely ruined because you're being selfish and vindictive. I'll never forgive you for destroying my education and my dreams." Each message was carefully crafted and designed to hit me right where it hurt the most, to trigger that lifetime of conditioning that had been drilled into my head since childhood, that family comes first no matter what, that I was personally responsible for everyone else's well-being and happiness, and that any problems they faced were somehow my fault for not sacrificing enough. But something fundamental had changed in me during those 2 months of independence. I could see the manipulation tactics now, plain as day, like someone had given me a pair of glasses that let me see through their emotional blackmail. The guilt trips that would have worked on me just a few months earlier now seemed transparent and pathetic. I didn't respond to any of their messages, not even to tell them to stop contacting me. But the absolute crown jewel of desperate manipulation came about 3 months after I'd left home, when Dad showed up at my apartment building completely unannounced. I still have no idea how he managed to find my address, probably through a mutual acquaintance or maybe by following me home from work like some kind of stalker. The thought of him putting that much effort into tracking me down was honestly pretty disturbing. I opened my apartment door to find him standing there in the hallway, looking like absolute hell. He'd clearly lost a significant amount of weight. His clothes were wrinkled and looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. And he had dark circles under his eyes that made him look like he hadn't slept properly in months. "Marcus," he said, his voice hoarse and strained, "can I come in? I think we need to talk man to man." "Why?" I asked, not moving from the doorway or inviting him inside. "To talk about this situation and figure out how to fix it before it's too late for everyone." Against my better judgment, and probably because I was curious to see just how far he was willing to go with his manipulation, I stepped aside and let him into my small studio apartment. He walked in slowly, his eyes darting around my modest but clean living space, taking in the simple furnishings I'd managed to acquire over the past few months. I had a futon that doubled as my bed, a small dining table with 2 chairs I'd found at a thrift store, and a TV stand with a 32-inch television I'd gotten on sale. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I was proud of what I'd accomplished with limited resources. "Nice place," he mumbled, but I could hear the judgment in his voice clear as day. To him, this was probably pathetic compared to the 2,200-square-foot house they were about to lose, the house that I had been paying for while they contributed absolutely nothing. "What do you want, Dad?" I asked directly, not interested in small talk or pleasantries. He collapsed onto my futon without being invited, like he owned the place and had every right to make himself comfortable in my personal space. The audacity was stunning, but it was also completely typical of his entitled behavior. "We're completely screwed, son," he said, running his hands through his unwashed hair. "Totally and completely screwed. The bank's taking the house next week. They've already posted the final foreclosure notice. Your mother's an absolute mess. She's lost 15 pounds and had to start taking anxiety medication just to function. Dylan's girlfriend kicked him out when he couldn't pay his share of her rent, so he's been sleeping in his car for the past 2 weeks. Lisa had to move in with her friend's family because we can't afford to feed her anymore, and she's completely humiliated by the whole situation." I didn't respond immediately. I just stood there leaning against my kitchen counter, waiting for him to get to the real reason for his surprise visit. I knew this wasn't just a social call to update me on the family's problems. "I know we made a mistake," he continued, his voice softening in what I'm sure he thought was a convincing display of remorse. "We didn't appreciate what you were doing for us all those years. We took advantage of your generosity and your sense of family responsibility. I can see that now, and I feel terrible about it. Your mother and I have talked about this situation a lot over the past few months, and we were completely wrong to treat you that way. I almost started to believe him. The apology sounded genuine, and he seemed to be acknowledging the family's dysfunction for the first time ever. But then he got to the real reason he'd tracked down my address and shown up at my door uninvited. "I'm here to make things right," he said, leaning forward with what he probably thought was sincerity. "If you come back home, things will be completely different this time. We'll respect you more, we'll appreciate everything you do for the family, and we'll treat you like the adult you are instead of taking you for granted." "You want me to move back in?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well, yes, and help with the finances again. Just until we get back on our feet and figure out a long-term solution. We've learned our lesson, Marcus. This whole experience has been a real wake-up call for all of us." I started laughing, and I couldn't help it. The situation was so absurd, so predictable, that I couldn't contain my reaction. Here was my father, who had shown up looking like a homeless person, asking me to come back and resume my role as the family ATM after they'd kicked me out for being a freeloader. "What's so funny?" he demanded, his fake humility immediately disappearing and being replaced by anger. "You haven't learned a single thing, have you?" I said, still chuckling at the sheer audacity of his request. "You're not sorry for how you treated me all those years. You're not sorry for the way you manipulated and used me. You're sorry that you lost your meal ticket and now you're facing the consequences of your own financial irresponsibility." His face hardened immediately, and I could see the real person underneath the desperate, apologetic facade he'd been trying to maintain. "Look at what you've done to this family," he shouted, pointing his finger at me accusingly. "Look at the destruction you've caused. We're about to lose everything because of your selfishness." "I didn't do anything to this family," I replied calmly. "You did this to yourselves. You and Mom and Dylan with your endless sense of entitlement and your complete refusal to take responsibility for your own lives. I just stopped enabling your dysfunction. So you're just going to let us become homeless?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of my small apartment. "What kind of monster are you? What kind of son abandons his family when they need him most?" That's when I decided to really twist the knife and show him exactly what his years of financial abuse had cost me. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward him so he could see the balance clearly displayed. The number showed $38,640. His eyes widened in shock and his mouth actually fell open. "What the hell is this?" "That's what I've managed to save in just 3 months of not supporting you people," I said, enjoying the look of stunned disbelief on his face. 3 months? That's how much money you were bleeding from me every month with your constant emergencies and demands. "So you do have the money," he exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and indignation. "You can save the house. You can prevent us from becoming homeless, but you're choosing not to help us." I put my phone away and looked him straight in the eyes. "I can, but I won't, because none of you deserve it after the way you've treated me." "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he started to say, probably gearing up for another round of fake apologies and manipulation. I cut him off before he could get started with whatever speech he'd rehearsed. "And I realized something too," I said. "You never wanted me to move out because you thought it was time, or because it would be good for my personal development, or any of that garbage you said at Christmas dinner. You wanted me out because you were embarrassed that your younger son was the real provider in this household. It hurt your fragile male ego that I was the man of the house in every way that actually counted." His face immediately went bright red, and I could see that I'd hit the nail squarely on the head. "That's not true at all," he sputtered. "It absolutely is, and you know it," I continued relentlessly. "And you know what? It's not my job to save you from the consequences of your own terrible decisions anymore. I'm keeping my money, I'm building my own life, and watching you finally face some real consequences for your actions is honestly the best revenge I could have asked for." I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide and making it clear that this conversation was over. "Get out." He got up slowly from my futon, defeat evident in every movement of his body. As he shuffled toward the door like a broken man, he stopped for one last desperate attempt at emotional manipulation. "Your mother will be completely devastated when I tell her you refuse to help," he said quietly. "This might actually kill her, Marcus. The stress and the shame of losing everything. I don't know if her heart can take it." I looked him dead in the eyes without flinching. "She'll survive. And if she doesn't, well, that's not my problem either." As he shuffled past me in the doorway, he paused for what I assumed would be his final attempt to guilt me into changing my mind. "We're family, Marcus. We're blood relatives. That has to count for something." I stared at him with all the contempt I'd been holding back for years. "Not anymore, we're not." I slammed the door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete, and total peace. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe freely without the weight of their expectations and demands crushing down on me. It's been 6 months now since I cut them off completely, and I couldn't be happier with my decision. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they did indeed lose the house and had to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town. Dad finally got a job working the register at a gas station, which I found absolutely hilarious. Guess his debilitating back injury miraculously healed when the alternative was actual homelessness and living on the streets. Mom's working full-time at the dental office now instead of part-time, probably for the first time in her adult life. Dylan was forced to take a job at a warehouse loading trucks, which is ironic considering Dad's supposed back injury from similar work. Lisa's working at McDonald's instead of going to college, flipping burgers and taking orders from teenagers who are probably more mature than she is. Meanwhile, my life has improved dramatically in every possible way. I got that promotion I had turned down years ago when I thought my family needed me more than my career did. My boss actually sought me out personally, saying they still needed someone with my specific skills and experience, and would I reconsider relocating to their main office. I'm making $76,000 a year now, with significantly better benefits, including health insurance that actually covers dental and vision. I bought a decent used Mazda to replace my ancient Honda that was held together with duct tape and prayer. I started dating again. Nothing too serious yet, but it's incredibly nice to be able to go out for dinner at actual restaurants without worrying about whether I'll have enough money left over to pay someone else's credit card bill or cover their car payment. I'm taking my first real vacation in years next month. I'm going to Montana to hike in the mountains, try some local craft beers, and spend a week not thinking about my family or their problems at all. I've already booked a cabin near Glacier National Park, and I'm planning to completely disconnect from social media and email for the entire week. Sometimes I feel a small pang of guilt, especially about Lisa. She's still young, and a lot of her entitled attitude and unrealistic expectations were learned behaviors from watching our parents manipulate and take advantage of people for years. She was raised in an environment where she was taught that other people's money was somehow automatically hers to spend, and that family members existed primarily to fund her lifestyle and dreams. But then I remember how none of them ever showed even an ounce of genuine appreciation for what I was doing for them year after year. How they treated me like a walking ATM machine instead of a human being with his own goals, dreams, and financial needs. How they made me feel guilty for wanting basic respect and recognition for literally keeping their household afloat. And when I think about all of that, the guilt vanishes completely. So here's my question for everyone reading this. Was I the asshole for cutting them off completely and watching them lose everything? Or did they get exactly what they deserved after years of financial abuse and manipulation? I know some people will probably say I should have given them more warning, or helped them transition to financial independence gradually instead of cutting them off cold turkey. But honestly, they had 4 years of me supporting them to figure out their own financial situation. 4 years is plenty of transition time for any reasonable person to get their act together, find steady employment, or at least develop some kind of backup plan that didn't involve exploiting a family member. Edit. Holy shit, this blew up overnight. Thanks for all the responses and comments. I honestly didn't expect this level of engagement when I posted this story. To answer some of the most common questions and comments. 1. Yes, I've considered helping Lisa with college costs if she reaches out to me with a genuine apology and shows that she's learned something from this whole experience. But so far, she's just sent me nasty text messages blaming me for destroying the family and ruining her future, so that's not happening anytime soon. 2. No, I don't miss them. Not even a little bit. The peace and quiet in my life now is incredible compared to the constant drama and financial demands I used to deal with. 3. For those saying I should have given them more transition time or a gradual reduction in support, they had 4 years of me supporting them financially. That was their transition time. 4 years is more than enough time for any responsible adult to develop a plan that doesn't involve financially abusing a family member. Some of you have asked about my dad's injury and whether it was legitimate. Yes, it was real initially. He did hurt his back in that loading accident and needed surgery, but he definitely milked it far beyond what was medically necessary. He would conveniently be in too much pain to do household chores, help with yard work, or look for any kind of employment. But he was somehow able to play golf twice a week with his brother and help friends move furniture when it suited him. 5. To the person who asked if I'd help if one of them had a genuine medical emergency. Honestly, I don't know. That's a bridge I'll have to cross if we ever come to it. Right now, I'm focusing on building my own life and financial security. 6. Someone asked about taxes and whether I ever claimed them as dependents. No, I never did that because I didn't want to risk an audit that would expose our weird financial arrangement. I've been filing as independent all these years, even when I was supporting multiple people. Update. Lisa reached out to me last week, but not for the reason you might think. Apparently, she broke up with her boyfriend and needed a place to stay, just until she finds a new apartment. Guess where she thought she could crash rent-free? Yep, with me in my tiny studio apartment. I offered to help her look for affordable housing options and roommate situations instead of just moving in with me. She called me an asshole and hung up on me. Some things never change, I guess.